Hey, what's up? This is Scott with Level Up Tutorials, and in this video, we're going to be writing our first reducer and our first action, which are two things that are very, very important into Redux, but can definitely confuse a lot of beginners because of some of maybe the jargony stuff or some of the syntax stuff. So I'm going to break it down really nice and easy, and we're going to learn about the very most basic type of action and reducer and why you might want to use them. Okay, so in the last video, we created our basic store, which was just outputting welcome, right? Well, it was outputting the welcome property with the value of hello. And we did so with these 3 lines, this very, very simple little bit of Redux code. Now in this video, what we want to do is create our first proper reducer as well as our first action. And we're going to talk a little bit about some core concepts of Redux that actually will work into the big picture quite a bit. So we have our constant hello, and hello is not a great name for this. We can change this to greeting, not grading, greeting. And let's change hello to greeting, because what this is going to be is, well, our reducer. And right now it's not particularly exciting. We simply just have a basic function. So let's work on this quite a little bit here. What we want to do is establish some sort of function that's going to take, well, the current state of our object overall, and it's going to, well, determine based on the type of action we're presenting it and modify the state. Now, I say it's modifying the state, but it's actually not modifying the state. And this is one of the concepts that's really super important in Redux. So let's get going here. We have our constant that's returning this. Now I'm going to go ahead and delete the results of that function and just have some standard brackets. Now at this point, we're going to change the parameters of our function here as well. In fact, we're going to accept the state as well as the action. Okay, so we're saying the state and the action come into greeting, and what we need to do now is check the type of action. So consider this, right? We have a toggle, like we have a window toggle. And the results of this are either going to be true or false, right? Whether this window is toggled. And so your action might be something like open window or close window, or it might even be toggle window. And what these types of descriptors of the action are action types. And an action type is going to be one of those things that's a core thing that you're going to be using all the time. And the way a reducer, which is what this function is, works is it takes the state, the current state, and it determines the type of action, whether that's toggle or open or close, and it's going to output a new state object with whatever changes need to be made. What it's not doing is it's not modifying the state. It's not modifying the actual data store. Now, why is this important? Well, let's head back to the Level Up Tutorials website where we can actually inspect some of our Redux here and talk about why that's important. If I select Redux here, okay, this is all pretty zoomed in here, but let me make this nice and easy to see. So we have our state here, and at any given time, if I jump back to any of one of our actions went off, whether it's user logging in, what it's going to be doing is showing me the state at that given time. The reason why this is possible is because Redux isn't modifying the state, it's creating an entirely new state object every single time. And this is actually pretty cheap for us. It doesn't impact performance at all. So it ends up creating a list of prior state trees. This way, it allows us to have the given state of the application sort of frozen in time whenever an action goes off. The action takes the current state tree, takes the modifications, it merges them, and outputs an entirely new state tree. So that is one of the core concepts for Redux. So let's head back to our app with that in mind, and let's write our reducer. Let's go ahead and inside of our function here, which we're calling a reducer, have a simple switch statement. Now this is just standard JavaScript where we can say switch. Now the property at which we're looking at is the action.type. okay? And the action type is going to be what describes the action. I mentioned toggle window, open window, that sort of thing. Since we're having sort of greetings here, we could check for a different type of greeting using a case. So we can say case, and if the action type is equal to greet underscore me, then the result is going to be returning. And this is where things get fun because, like I mentioned, we're not going to overwrite the state. We're going to return an entirely new state. So we can have an object here and have a welcome message just simply be hello, Scott. Okay. And then we could have another case in which that case can be case greet world, okay? And we can return another new object, which is simply just welcome hello world, okay? Now, with any of this stuff, we always need a default case, so we can just say default. And by default, if none of this stuff is here, I'm just going to return the state itself. Okay, that is the state that's coming into this. And let me missing some semicolons here. There we go. So we now have our first reducer. And notice how this isn't really that much more complex than what we had before. It's simply just a function that's outputting an object. It's either outputting hello Scott or hello world or whatever the default may be. We'll set up the default in a second here. However, it's just doing so based on a switch statement. So again, this is nothing more than a function. Now you'll notice we're getting output defined because we don't have any default state. Let's go ahead and define some default state. And we're going to say const default state is equal to, and this is just going to be an object with welcome being hi, okay? Now, in addition to welcome equal to hi, we're also simply going to do something funny here. We're going to have, well, another property that's just other state, okay? And other state is just going to be some stuff, just a string, right? And this is going to illustrate how we don't want to modify the rest of the state here in a second. So now with default state defined inside of our function here, inside of our parameters, we can say state is equal to default state. Now, if you don't know the syntax, what this is saying is if state is passed into greeting, then use state. Otherwise, use this default argument, which is the default state here. So by saying state equals default state, we're setting this initial value of state to default state. Since nothing is getting passed into this function at all, when we're using it down here in greeting, then the default state is set to default state. You'll now notice that we have in our store as hi and some other stuff. So this isn't anything groundbreaking, but our store is starting to come to life because, well, we have more than one thing in our object. And we're going to illustrate a major problem here in just a second when we write our very first action. Now, what an action is basically something that says, hey, go modify the state. And we're going to use an action, and actions can be kind of confusing when we first start. Because when you think of the word action, you think of like, I'm going to go do something, right? And when you think of I'm going to go do something, you think of a function. But a action is actually going to be an object. So that's a major confusion point for most people because an action itself is an object. However, we dispatch an action is how we say, hey, go do that thing, right? So the action itself is not a function to go do it. It's just a describer of what we're doing. And then the dispatch is going to say, hey, go do that thing. And you'll remember we saw dispatch as a property or a method of store. So we're going to be using store.dispatch. Now, once we get into Redux and React land, you're not going to see store.dispatch anymore, and there's going to be a better way to dispatch. So don't worry if this feels overly verbose. It's one of those things that goes away. So we can say store.dispatch. And now remember, I said that an action is simply just an object. So we have some curly brackets here, and typically actions can contain all sorts of stuff from data to what's called maybe like a payload. If you're hitting an API, that data that comes back can go inside of your action, and then that can be set and added to your state with the reducer. However, in this particular case, we're not doing anything with data. We're simply just saying, hey, if it's an action type greet me, then output welcome hello Scott, and if it's greet world, output hello world. So to dispatch something, we simply just need to say, hey, dispatch something with a type, right? Here comes action.type, a type of, well, in this case, greet me or greet world. If we have something else that doesn't fit here, it's going to go to the default. So let's do greet me and see hello Scott being output. So keep in mind, I'm defining a constant function here, but here, well, I'm trying to dispatch something before our store is created. So we actually need to move this constant store above this. So we first create our reducer, then we create our store, and then we say, hey store, dispatch this action. And now when we output get state, we should see hello Scott. So you can now see we have hello Scott. Let's go ahead and put one of these get states above our dispatch right here. You can now see our initial state, which is hi, some other stuff. Then we run the action and the store is updated to now say type greet me. Now what's cool about this is if we were to go back in time before this greet me action had been dispatched, we could see this initial state, which is hi and some other state. So just some of the cool things about how Redux handles that. However, you're going to instantly notice a major problem here. When we output welcome hello world or welcome hello Scott, we have completely erased our other state. Remember, what's returned from a reducer is going to completely replace the entire object. It's not modifying it. Okay, so to make this so we can keep our previous state while only modifying the state that we want to modify before outputting a new object, we simply can do it this way. We can say ... state and then comma. Okay, let's put this into the welcome as well. So what's up with this ... state? Well, this is saying, hey, in this object, give me all of the properties and values from the current state tree. However, override welcome with hello Scott. This is using something called ES6 object destructuring. This is something that's new to ES6 and allows us to really take this entire object and only override what we want to. So all of the properties that were already in state, which was really just other state and some stuff, we can add one more if you want, other states, some other stuff. Okay, and you're going to see this works the exact same. The full object is now represented every single time. Okay, so again, we have a default state. We have our first reducer, which is simply just having a switch statement that's checking the action type. If you're greeting me, we're going to set the welcome message to hello Scott. If you're greeting the world, we're going to set the welcome message to hello world. We've then created a store using that reducer and only that reducer. When we get into larger examples, you're going to be creating mini reducers and combining them. Okay, then we're outputting the current state of the default state of our state tree, and then we're dispatching an action, which we're just saying, hey, go greet me. And then it's updating that portion of the state. And you can see using get state, we can see we are now greeting Scott. Okay, so all of this seems a little convoluted, and it definitely seems like a lot of work, because you remember if we, in React, if we wanted to update the state of anything, we just do set state. This state is equal to true or false. And in this, we have a big old switch statement that's having to take the previous state and modify and all this stuff. It seems like a lot of work, right? And while this will all get simpler, you'll definitely understand quite a bit more why we want to do things like this instead of a simple get state, set state, and when we should still use those. because set state isn't going anywhere. We don't have to pretend like it doesn't exist since we're using Redux. So check it out. This is our very first reducer that's actually like complete. This is our very first action, and it's all working. Now it's not working in the context of React, and it's not working with the dev tools or anything crazy, but it's working nonetheless, and we have an actual state tree, a state object that's starting to resemble something we could start to use. Okay, so while this video is a little long in terms of getting up and running here, we now have our object. The next video is going to be much shorter as we show you a little bit more about practical ways that you can add information to actions and make them a little bit more useful than simply just saying, hey, change the greeting. Because right now this greet me is, yeah, it's great for sort of binary things, right? Or maybe even things like this where you have very specific examples. But when we're working with data and stuff like that, it doesn't make a whole ton of sense. So in the next video, we're going to elaborate on this just a little bit before actually heading into React land and showing you how we can start to use Redux and React together for perfect state harmony and having everything super, super cool for our data, for our actions, for toggles, and all sorts of great stuff. So if you want to learn about Redux, head over to leveluptutorials.com/store and become a pro, or purchase this series outright if subscriptions aren't your thing. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.